Welcome, everyone, to our Family Fridays. We're so glad that you're back with us today. Today, we are talking about thriving in the virtual classroom. Last week, we talked about if you are sending your children in person. And now this week, we are addressing if you are at home doing the virtual classroom thing. So we have some great panelists. I'm going to get to that in a second. But first, just a reminder again about our Education Matters, this guide for teachers. It's always a great resource. It's even a more important resource this year. So I want to invite you. You can either get a hard copy or you can print it off. You'll see the link down below. So please access that resource. It's there for you. A lot of professionals have spent a lot of time putting it together, those who know Duchenne well. So it can be used, and let me say, not just for teachers, but also if you're working with psychologists, you're working with physical therapists. There's a lot of different places where this resource can be helpful to educate your professionals working with you about Duchenne and to just know some of the standards of care, because we also have those for psychological aspects and also for education, some things that we need to know to take into the classroom. So please get the Education Matters. Today, for our panelists, we have some great Duchenne moms and educational gurus. So I'm excited for you to listen and just hear from them. We have Jill Castle, who was with us last week. She is a Duchenne mom, a coordinator for Arizona, and has worked in education and advocacy. As she says, she's been on all sides of it, as a parent, as an educator, as an advocate. So she is going to help us with virtual school. And then Gretchen Inger, who's joined us before, she is in Wisconsin and a Connect coordinator, and a high school teacher and a parent. So she's got some great ideas for us. And then Joanna Johnson is joining us now from Pennsylvania. She's a PPMD board member, a high school Spanish teacher, and also has boys with Duchenne. So I'm excited for you to hear from all three of them. I think they're going to help us as we sit here. I have two kiddos doing virtual school, so I am right in the middle of it with you, and I need some help. So I'm glad that they're going to be with us. Jill, let's start with you, just to introduce yourself and just kind of share some of the behavior and other issues we have to deal with when we get to virtual school.
Does it switch over to me? Oh, there. Okay. Hi. Thank you so much for the introduction. Just real quick for those who don't know me, so you kind of just understand where I'm coming from. Yeah, I've got a master's degree in educational psychology and behavior, which is really about how people learn. So it's that's part of my background. And then I also worked for the State Department of Arizona, solving disputes. I've taught at all levels, and then I've also been a special education director. So more importantly, I'm a parent of a 20-year-old son with Duchenne. So yes, I have kind of the big round view of everything, hopefully. So today I was going to address some of the concerns that people are having with OT and PT services in the IEP and how that looks. And then I was going to talk about a little bit about a behavior plan to set up your space at home. So first off, the OT and PT services, again, like we've talked about in the past, there are some schools that are fantastic that do the stretching and go above and beyond, but for the most part, legally, technically, in the IEP, the OT and PT is to navigate the school environment. So now that you're home, you may have districts telling you that they really don't need to do those services. You can push and say, well, I would like consult, and use the word consult because that makes sense to them. That's a category that they put those services and those funds into. So you say, I need OT and PT consult. Maybe, once every few weeks, but definitely in the beginning, because you just want them to look at your home environment. You need the PT and the OT to look at your home environment and just make recommendations possibly about how they're seated, how they're accessing the technology. The OT often in districts serves as the AT person, or they work in conjunction with AT. So often they could even make suggestions about AT you could use at home. So those consults are important, and those are part of the IEP process. Careful to not demand things that are unreasonable. You do have the right to that consult, but to have ongoing services, what I often find is that parents push for the most they can get, and they're really getting very mediocre services that are taking up everybody's time and energy that aren't very beneficial, because they're actually pushing for that and making someone do something that they're really not even capable of providing. So it ends up kind of being a big waste of time. So use it judiciously, and definitely get your right is to have it, but use it to set that up, and then hopefully take it from there, and then possibly use the consult services throughout the semester, or hopefully not the year, to adjust things at home. So that's my recommendation for OTPT. Use them as a partner to work with you at home. But ongoing services every week, that I'm not quite sure how that's going to look, and I'm not sure that's really even necessary, to be honest. The second part I wanted to address is the behavior. And when I say behavior, people always think that means bad behavior. And everybody's reaction is to dismiss what I'm saying because I don't have a kid with bad behavior. I've got it all under control. I'm talking about your behavior is your communication. So I'm talking about resisting, being quiet when you want them to participate, not engaging. Those are behaviors. They don't always have to be a negative behavior to be a behavior that you want to modify. So I do, since we don't have a lot of time on this webinar, I do on my YouTube channel, it's called SPED Hacks, and I do have a positive behavior support introductory video. It may be too basic for some people that have been doing this a while, but even for me, those refreshers are really nice, just to have those basic behavior principles and how to kind of manage our kids, because it's really, really tough right now. And even the most well-behaved kid could be shutting down, and that's a behavior, shutting down online after a little while. And there are ways around that. You can set up breaks. You can, whatever they're asking to go do instead of school can be the reward after 15 more minutes. They can actually tell you how to set that up by what they're asking for. And it can become a very natural reward system that you can kind of get in the habit of, that just makes all of your lives easier. So there are kind of hacks for that. Structure, they're going to talk about that. Our beautiful teachers are going to talk about that. But you have to have structure. And I know that's so hard during this chaos. But it's good for all of us. And behaviorally, you will get more cooperation. Our boys have a tendency to have a little bit of rigidity, right? To have a little bit of cognitive rigidity. That works in our favor, because once we move them over to a different set of schedule and rituals, we can get them to kind of move in line with what we need them to do. It's just that transition, because they want to stay in their own rituals. But there are ways to gently move them into different ones. And then they're kind of on autopilot, because they do tend to find safety in that rigidity. Of course, that's generalizing, but that does seem to be typical of a good portion of our boys. And lastly, I will say that, I just got stuck on my notes, so I'm just going to speak freely. Sorry. So the last part I will say is that once you set up that environment, we all keep in mind about our expectations of them. Maybe they can sit for 8 hours and play a video game. That's something they want to do. So yeah, it's going to look a little bit different expecting anybody to sit for that long. You can and have the right in your IEP to modify that instruction. You even have the right on a 504 to modify the time and the accessibility. If they're checking out after a certain amount of time, you do have the right to modify and scale things down and get what you can get out of them. It's okay. They don't have to do everything that they're being expected. The goal is positivity and progress forward. It's not compliance. Right now, compliance is a really difficult thing. And if you go into it for just compliance, the pressure and everything becomes kind of negative. And I've seen that be very counterproductive. So that's kind of all I have for my introduction.
That's great, Jill. I was just going to add a couple of things that we found really helpful. We kind of looked at my son's station and purchased a desk that we can adjust so his wheelchair can get underneath that. And that was really helpful. So I think even if you don't have a physical therapist, a OT come out, look at your child's space, because that could also contribute to the behavior if they're not feeling comfortable in their space. And we do a chart with each hour and what he has to do, and he checks it off. And as Jill said, I've seen that's been so helpful for him to work within that routine. And then in terms of, one thing we've experienced is he's just not moving his body as much. So we try to get out and go to the community pool or something like that to swim right after school so that he can get a little energy out. So those are some hacks, things that I've learned in the past week and a half while I've been doing virtual school. So now let's go to Gretchen, and she is going to just talk a little bit more about what are the differences between virtual school and homeschool, and some of the other things with working with your teachers?
Yeah, so I teach high school English in Wisconsin. And just like everyone else, in March, everybody was thrown into that. You're at home and lessons are being provided, probably, but it was kind of a hodgepodge for most people. And so that terminology, they're all at home, and especially for the younger kids, a lot of times that did turn into really a lot of like full-time teaching for some of the parents at home. And so hopefully for the fall, districts have been able to set up a better plan and something with definitely more structure than there was in the spring when we kind of had to go on the fly. That said, my district, for example, decided last week at an 11:30 p.m. board meeting to go hybrid. And that meant, all the kids are at school half the time, and then they're at home half the time. And we didn't have any like prep or training in what that was going to look like. And so now we are, I won't say scrambling, but we're kind of figuring out very quickly what that's going to look like and how our instruction is going to be. So if you pulled your students out of the school because they weren't offering that virtual instruction and you need them to be at home, that's really homeschooling, where you're structuring the lessons and you're finding the things. But for virtual learning, really the instruction, the curriculum, those things should be provided by your teacher or teachers if they're at the secondary level. And then they also would be responsible for that assessment and figuring out how they're going to see whether you've done those things. So when Jill speaks to modifications, things that might be modified, as a parent, if you see that what they're being asked to do is too much, definitely you can ask, the teacher, or explain to the teacher why that might need to be modified, or why a deadline may need to be extended. And my assumption would be that every teacher is going to, give parents some grace, because they're expecting some patience on behalf of parents, because this is a huge learning curve. This is my 22nd year in my district, and I have never been so nervous and overwhelmed, to go back to school. And I'm, I love my kids and I'm excited to see them. But I definitely feel ill prepared for the virtual teaching, the live teaching lessons and having them in class but separated at the same time. I think last week in the live, I know Jenny Garofalo spoke about making sure you establish a good relationship with your child's teachers, and that is great advice regardless of whether they're kindergarten or high school. There may be some last minute shifts in staffing depending on how recently decisions were made about virtual or face-to-face. Things may have shifted with that. So the point person that you have in special ed for your student may have changed. And so you may want to touch base with the school, touch base with that point person, and just kind of remind them what those needs are that your child has. And then also just to have a feel for the platforms that are being used by your children's teachers, especially if you have more than one student or you have more than one school that your kids are attending. Some districts, they're very streamlined. Everybody uses Blackboard or everybody uses Seesaw. Others, it's left up to the school or it could be left up to the teacher. And I'm a big proponent of independence and getting your students to advocate for themselves. So, you know, the high school level, I would say I'd ask my kid what it is that they're doing and not, you know, directly ask the teacher and only do that later after the child has advocated. But you know your kids, so you know if you need to kind of step in there. And if you have a general feel for what those platforms are, you can make sure that they're accessible on their iPad. You can have a flavor for what those deadlines are for different things, how things in that overview in the first couple weeks are going to be structured. I know when first weeks of school, my kids are both in college and out of college now, but I remember that first week of school was always my first week back. And then the kids were bringing home all this stuff that needed to be signed and all those things that you have to read. And, you know, you read some of it, but some of it you just sign and you send off and you hope all is good. And I think in the virtual setting, when we're getting all that email, and we're getting all those things, as soon as you close it, it's gone. It's not that pile of paper anymore that you're reminded of. I would say taking just a little extra time as those things are rolling in to have an eye for what it is that each teacher is expecting. What are those school expectations? Just kind of know those things and, you know, maybe have just a little list that you're making of these are the things I want to make sure that I take care of or that I come back to or that I ask my kid about to make sure that they understand. I would say, just as the last thing, I have two sons. My older son is 23. He does not have Duchenne. He made it through high school. He made it through college somehow, and he has a job in Denver, and he is great. He would have failed all his classes in virtual school because of that like lack of structure and the, hey, I can do it later, and no one over him. My son Nick, who's going to be a senior in college this year, he would have thrived in virtual stuff because he just on his own, he would always write an agenda. He always kept his agenda and he always knew his deadlines. So this is, you know, an opportunity for us to really, you know, like Jill said, they've got some rigidity, but that also means that they have structure inherently. And if they don't, this is a good time for us to really hone that skill with our kiddos.
Thank you, Gretchen. That's good information. I think you made a good point that some of our kids are going to thrive in this virtual environment and some of our kids are going to struggle, and you have to know your kid and you may have to do more for give more assistance to your child who's struggling or maybe help set those routines up so that they can thrive in that environment. But I think you make a really good point about that each child's going to it's going to be different how they interact with the virtual environment, and so to be sensitive to that. The other point I really liked is that this could be an opportunity for you to teach your child some advocacy skills. You know, for Duchenne kids, sometimes the social aspect of talking to teachers is difficult, but maybe over email, they can practice that advocacy a little bit more. And that might just be a good skill to work on with them. I know we had that experience where my son wrote an email and let us proof it, and then he sent it to the teacher. And so that was a really great experience for us where we were able to walk with him during that advocacy piece. So remember, there are some new skills and things that you can learn in the virtual environment. So we can't say this is all going to be terrible because there's going to be some new skills that we can maybe work with our kids to help them learn. So now let's go to Joanna, just to share a little bit more kind of about the whole virtual situation.
Yeah, hi. Again, for those who don't know me, I'm Joanna Johnson. I live in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. It's outside of Philadelphia. I have two sons with Duchenne. Elliot is 16 and he's entering his junior year, and Henry is 14 and he is entering his freshman year. And I have been a high school Spanish teacher for the last 20 years. I don't go to my kids don't go to the same school where I teach, so I'm kind of learning lots of things. I'm what we're doing is different what they're doing. So again, it's a unique perspective, like all of us teachers out there that are getting our kids prepared, and if we have school age children, and getting ourselves prepared for this new unique learning environment. And I think Gretchen said it, but teachers are always anxious at the start of the school year, but and kids are too, I know. But I think this year, teachers are probably more anxious than ever, because the plan has been so up in the air, and it's changed so many times. So I think that's a really important thing to know, because for the most part, it just helps you establish, I think, a relationship with your children's teachers, if you're able to kind of come to it with some understanding of that, and know that there's a learning curve for everybody here. So there were just a couple of tips that I wrote down, thinking about how to best get your kids prepared for a virtual learning situation. And the one thing is just to be prepared, and to get to know your students' schedule, because they're different everywhere, and it depends. It really depends on the school, and every school has developed a different schedule for how they're going to do online learning. And I remember a couple weeks ago, when my son's schedule came out, I sat down with my husband and took a look at it and said, okay, how are we going to plan this out? Okay, so the day is going to start here. Here's how it's going to go. Might be a little bit easier to manage with elementary school children, but sometimes with high school, it's based on letter days. And you really have to, it's not Monday through Friday. So you've really got to get a sense of what letter day is today, and what's the schedule going to be today, because it looks, at least for my son's school, it looks like it's going to vary. I think Gretchen had said this, but be prepared for a more structured learning situation than happened in the spring. Again, we were all thrown into it in the spring, and at least for both my sons and myself, there was not a lot required as far as coming to an online like situation like this, where you had to come to a class and attend. And those things are definitely, it seems to me, at least, it's more structured, and it should be. I think in the spring, we were all thrown into it, and we know the best way to do this is to at least have something like this, where you're having some kind of face-to-face interaction, some kind of live lesson that your kids are attending. I had to complete this summer a whole training. I'm still finishing it. As far as like, what is online education? What's all the terminology? How's this supposed to work? And sometimes I think it's important to know the terminology, and it makes sense, but you might be hearing things like synchronous versus asynchronous. And that's a big term that goes with it. And synchronous is something like this Zoom, where your child has to attend, they have to log in at a certain time, and they have to be in a meeting like this. And then there's asynchronous, where they should be working independently on certain things. So it's just, again, getting a look at that schedule. When is it synchronous? When is it asynchronous? Because at least it seems like for most districts in my area, they're doing a combination of that. So the kids aren't sitting from 7:45 to 2:45 every day looking at a screen. There's some kind of, balance between that. And just like if it was a regular school year, and I especially think it's important for some of our kiddos, organization is key. Again, I come from the perspective of, my two kids are entering high school. But if you have a younger child, just kind of working with them to develop something, maybe something visually appealing, a whiteboard, a calendar, or something where they contributed to it, so that they know what they need to do at certain times. For middle school and high school, talk with your kid. What works best? What do you want to do? Do you want me to get a whiteboard? Do you want me to just get a desk calendar? You're going to do something online, and something that's visual for everybody, because I think there's going to be a lot of coordination. And we talked about this earlier, everybody, when a physical space where your kid needs to be, but having a designated space where they're doing their work. And this is school, and school time starts, and this is where you're going to be. And we've kind of talked about it. My sons have been like, so like, can we still like sleep in? And like, we don't really have to get up like we normally would for the bus. And I was like, nope, we're doing the same exact thing. You're going to get up at, they have a little bit more time to sleep, but I said, no, you're going to get up at 6:30. You're going to get dressed. We're going to eat breakfast. And then we're going to get you, into your desk with your computer set up, and you're going to be ready to go. So with that in mind, and I know that everything's been loosey-goosey, but, making sure that if school hasn't started already, that you tried to dial back on the bedtime and make sure that it's a little earlier so that they're, able to get up early. Because again, it looks like school, it's not going to be the same as before where you get up and do the work whenever. You're going to have to get up like you normally would for school. And then this is the last thing, just to piggyback on what Jill and Gretchen and Rachel had said, really like keeping the lines of communication open. This is new for all of us. And ultimately, most of your teachers, they want to do a good job. They love your kids. They care about your kids. And they're trying to figure this along the way. And sometimes some teachers, they're like, oh, they went on a website or looked at something and it looked like a really neat piece of technology that would help your child complete the assignment. And maybe it's a nightmare. And if you don't tell me that I messed up and it was not good, then I'm not gonna know. So, and don't be afraid to say, don't have your kid be afraid to say that. I'm a big one where I have Elliot and Henry email their teachers, not myself. I might help them construct the email, but I want it to come from them. And I would be, oh, well, gosh, I didn't even think that was a bad platform or it was difficult to work with. And in that too, like, if things are not working out, like communicate with the teacher first. I always say, if that doesn't work out, go to your IEP team, or if you have to go to the school administration and say, look, there's things that are not working out here. And we need to reconvene the IEP team and see what we might need to do to improve the situation.
Great. Thank you, Joanna. I think a couple of things you hit on were great. Just getting up and getting breakfast. I know a couple mornings we slept in too far and didn't get the breakfast going, and that did not go well. So highly recommend breakfast. The other thing is, thank you for explaining what synchronous and asynchronous is. I just wish they would have said Zoom or not Zoom. That would have made way more sense to me.
I know.
Yeah, but thank you. Now I know. Now I've got it. So I really appreciate that. Okay, something that I know not just Duchenne parents, but a lot of parents are concerned about is socialization during this time, and are my kids getting enough socialization with their peers? So I wanted to invite Gretchen to speak on that a little bit, and also just to let you know, if you have questions, now's your time for questions. Put them in the comment section and we can direct them and get your questions answered. So please go ahead and do that. But Gretchen, can you speak to us a little bit about the socialization piece with virtual school?
Yeah, when Nick was younger and he was walking, he was diagnosed before he started school, and so we were always so cautious about everything. And so from the get-go, he was less involved in gym. He was less involved when everybody would run for story time and sit down. He wouldn't be doing, he would always be slower, and then he was more reluctant to things, and so that made him a shyer, quieter kid. And so I would say, especially in those younger grades, now is a time that really levels the playing field if everyone is at home for virtual instruction. And if you see, again, and I'm not one to say, get in your teacher's business, but if you see that there aren't a lot of opportunities for the students to be socializing and collaborating, I would maybe speak up about that, because I think there are lots of breakout groups. When we talk about the synchronous learning, that's the live learning where every kid is logged in at the same time. And so teachers can have kids go into breakout rooms together and kind of work together in like smaller cohorts and smaller groups. And so I think for a teacher to recognize that, Johnny's shy, and so he's going to benefit being in this, being in a group and putting them in people that gives them that opportunity to socialize. Just as in the classroom, you would be telling the teacher, to maybe purposely put them in a group with students who are going to be more flexible or more understanding if they are, slower physically to get stuff, or people who are going to be more willing to pull stuff out of the backpack or out of the desk for a student. I think making sure that the teacher is aware of those opportunities that exist, and definitely that point person, that collaboration is is happening. I think I've referenced this many times, but when video games first started with the headset and you could communicate and talk to kids from across town whose stairs you couldn't climb, so you couldn't go into their house and visit, that opened up a whole window of socialization and independence for Nick. And so this is definitely an opportunity for our kids to evenly, they can use their voice, they can use their charm, they can use their wit, they can use their skill, and they can chat. And it doesn't matter if they're sitting on the floor, they're sitting in a wheelchair, or they're sitting in a chair that's well supported. It's all face to face and it's all even.
That's great. I think some of this virtual stuff does help I've heard from multiple parents that this has been a great time for their kids to make friends because they've been online and everybody's been at home. And so it's just been a lot more opportunities for socialization, which is great. I also want to go back to something from last week that I think is still important. I know Jen Garofalo talked about making a sheet about your child, especially maybe elementary and middle school, to give to the teachers. And you can send that by email. So to all of the teachers that they interact with, and that will help them know as well, like, I might be a little more shy. You may have to, call on me more or that sort of thing. But please go ahead and send that all about me also to your virtual teachers so that they can kind of have a face and have a little bit more personality that goes with that. And I think Jill wants to speak on that a little bit more. And also, Jill, I did want to ask you about, this was a question that came up. Can you modify a child's schedule through the IEP, and how do you do that?
Okay. Yeah. Well, you kind of covered what I was going to say about the letter, because I started that a long time ago. But what I started was a sheet attached to like a Starbucks card. I did that for bus drivers, lunch ladies, recess people that didn't get the IEP, because those were the people that helped bring a culture around the kid that didn't necessarily have the opportunity to sit in the IEP meetings. So same mindset, and you bring up a great point to email a letter. You could also send a Starbucks card to that overstressed, burnt out teacher, and I bet she will. Again, and it's not necessarily bribery, it's more rapport building, and just showing someone that you understand how difficult this is for them. And so I still do recommend those steps. Those are great steps. So what was the question that I meant that you just asked, the second part? I'm sorry.
That's okay. The question was, can you use the IEP? Should you go into that to modify the school schedule if you need to?
Yeah, absolutely. You can do that on an IEP or a 504, because 504 is accessibility, right, to the curriculum that everybody else has accessibility to. If my kid had a rough night and can't get up in the morning, that's physical accessibility to the curriculum. So yeah, those things can be modified. The IEP is modifying specialized instruction. That's the difference between the IEP and the 504, is the specialized instruction. That is specialized instruction if your kid only has the physical wherewithal or the intellectual wherewithal, behavioral wherewithal to only sit for a certain amount of time blocks. That's something that you need to rearrange. That's going to be individual with your IEP team. You can do an IEP meeting over Zoom. I suggest, if it isn't that time of the year with everything going on, you get that on the radar with your team is, hey, can we just touch base with the Zoom meeting to just go over how this implementation of this IEP is going to look? Because no, we can't necessarily keep the same goals that we have in our IEP, because pragmatically, who's going to keep data on those goals? Is the teacher over Zoom going to keep data? Is the parent going to keep data? It does become challenging. You might have to let some of those goals go, but you can also open some new ones that you might not have had to worry about before. And you can just have 3 things that you add that puts everybody on the same page. Maybe some flexibility with assignments when they're due, maybe some flexibilities of how long they have to sit or how they have to participate, or like somebody mentioned, putting them in more breakout rooms to help facilitate a mentor situation. You take, I've always taken students that were sort of at risk in my classroom and paired them up with my special needs students as a mentor, because it kept them both busy and it kept them both in good company, and it's always worked beautifully. So those are things you could talk about during a Zoom IEP meeting, that you could just have just to go over to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Great. Another thing that I've noticed is all the teachers are having office hours where they're accessible. And I think that's something as Duchenne parents, we probably need to utilize a little more. I know my son has some learning issues in math. And so I said, during office hours, we're going to have to go and spend some time with your math teacher. So use those office hours. I think that that's an opportunity to kind of let them know some of the special needs that your child may have. And I know Joanna wants to share a little bit about that. And then I actually have another question for you, Joanna. How do you navigate having multiple kids? Maybe it's two Duchenne kids, or maybe it's a sibling and a Duchenne kid. How do you navigate multiple kids at home? I'm very interested in this one personally.
But back to the office hours real quick. As a teacher, I mean, what I miss and what we all miss the most, I miss my kids so much last year. I desperately miss them. And the way that our school worked last year, because again, we were figuring out, they were never required to come to the live lessons. So the office hours, I had them and nobody came. And honestly, when they did, it was like I broke out in tears. I was so excited just to see. I was like, oh, hi! Like, what do you need help with? I was desperate to help my kids because that's what I do every day and that's what I want to do. And you didn't get to do that. Like, I was just putting videos out, and so I think that is something your teachers. First of all, if you come to the office hours, I'm going to tell you that's going to go a way long way to a teacher wanting to accommodate whatever you're going to need. I had kids in the end that I was dragging along tooth and nail. I remember my husband was laughing. He's like, I think you did that whole assignment for that kid. And I said, because he came and he was struggling so bad. And I just wanted to help him. So take advantage to those office hours because your teachers want to see you and they're underutilized. Kids don't come to them. Unfortunately, I think they're intimidated by the teacher or they're weirded out by the Zoom. But even if you wanted to go as the parent and say, my kid's really struggles at like coming to these Zooms, how could I make it, how could we make it more comfortable for him? So just don't hesitate to take advantage of them. With two kids, the only thing that is the benefit for me is they're both in the same school this year. So I have that advantage. So I'm dealing with one schedule. So that's makes it easy. But the way that their room, I mean, this is just our personal situation. We have their bedrooms. They have two separate rooms when we did a renovation, but there's just an open door between them. So it just makes it easy to navigate between the two of them and their needs. And it's going to be a wait and see kind of process. But at this point, what we've done so far is set up an area for each of them. The other thing I was getting them each a good set of headphones so that they're not distracted by the talking or the listening to the other classroom. So that's something I wanted to make sure. I know Henry has a good set, but I think Elliot could use a better set. So I want to purchase that. And my goal is really just to keep it as structured as the school day can be. Like, it's lunch and you have a half an hour and we're going to eat lunch for a half an hour. And it's not like lunch in the summer where we watch an episode or two of Parks and Rec. Like, nope, you got to eat your lunch and get back to it. So just trying to understand their schedule as best and kind of give them their own separate areas and take it from there.
Okay, great. And I think something else is, some of us also are working from home, parents trying to juggle that. And one thing we can do is try to lessen the anxiety in the situation. I'm speaking from experience. This is anxiety provoking, and we kind of set the tone for the day based on that. And I know sometimes it gets stressful when everybody's using all the bandwidth and your Zoom's not working. But as much as we can kind of maintain a non-anxious presence in that, I think that also, I found that helps. Joe, I wanted to go to you for a minute. because we are at home and we're with our kids and kind of seeing their educational process a little bit more, sometimes we may see some learning things that we didn't see before. So I want to ask you, what do you do if you become aware that maybe, we know Duchenne kids could often have dyslexia, dyscalculia, ADD, all those things. So if you're seeing some of those things, what should you do?
Okay, that's a great question. Because you still legally are allowed to request evals during this time. You can. They're just going to be challenging, and they could possibly do them over Zoom. I think rather though during this time getting caught up in the legal process that we're all allowed to participate in, I think we're sort of in emergency situation, right? We have to think pragmatically. So I would reach out to me, or, there's so many people in our community that are knowledgeable about modifications. And so if you talk to someone that has background in that and you say, okay, I see him struggling with this, like for instance, ADDers who can read a whole passage and then not tell you what they just read. We can put them on audio. We use assistive technology to do audio while they're reading, and their brain picks it up better. There are a ton of modifications. You don't need to wait for a 60-day eval and do all that craziness with your team right now during this crazy time. You can just get the help that you need and go straight to those modifications. You're already using assistive technology by using Zoom and all that. So maybe people will be more open to try some of the AT tools that we use. Because really at the end of the day, all those evals and all that information that you're going to get, the whole point of it is to just look at the answer. So right now we might need to just skip right to the answer. So you can always reach out to me and find me on Facebook, but we also have a lot of other people. And we have a lot of those modifications suggested in the Education Matters that we wrote, right? We have a lot of that in there too. So we just need to get savvy and get to the solution, and stay out of the problem, get to the solution. So.
Great, thank you. And I think that's another, going back to that resource, if you're seeing some new things in learning behavior, go to that resource and see if that can kind of help you. Joanna, did you have something you wanted to say on that?
No, it just, I think there's so much that I think on an online environment that's available already that you don't even realize. That I think a lot of that is just like Jill said, a lot of that assistive technology. I know, for example, on the learning management system that my district uses, there's a feature on it called Immersive Reader. And you might not even know what that is. And I think it all of a sudden popped up, and I was like, what is that? And it basically reads the page to the kid.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of stuff that's built in that, again, you don't need a big meeting. I think it's already there, just because we're using the technology all the time.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that in some ways our boys have been using assistive technology way before all this. So we might be a little more versed in it actually than the general public. So Gretchen, I have a question for you. What are the expectations for homework? And I know you're just kind of going to speak in general, but is that incorporated into asynchronous? I call that non-Zoom,
Mhm.
or additional work, like it would be a typical school day. So do we, and I know can't answer for everywhere, but is there a general trend that some of that offline work is the homework?
I'm hoping that is what it is considered for everyone. Because really, if you're at home, it's all homework. And I stopped giving homework as a thing a long time ago because I want to see them process. I want to see them do stuff. I'm an English teacher, so when you send them home to read, that's the homework because they should be reading, and then we discuss it when we get back. I think another way to look at synchronous and asynchronous is the live versus on demand. So, the people who watch this live, they're doing the synchronous and watching it. People who are busy right now and they come back and they watch it tonight, that's the asynchronous. And so for students who are busy, or they are taking care of siblings, or they are doing something else, them coming back and watching this, that's asynchronous, but that's also like homework because they're doing the assignment. I think because, and I look at it from, I think, a different perspective than some folks, because I just look at my kids, and when we went virtual in March, I couldn't imagine my students who are probably expected to watch younger siblings and take care of younger siblings and maybe fill in and get a job someplace during the interim, to expect everybody to log in at 7:35 a.m. for, hey, let's talk about English. That seemed unrealistic to me. Now with this new virtual, it's going to be an expectation on those virtual days that, we have a live lesson and we are going. But I think it all comes back to just taking that time and looking at what their day looks like. And everything that I have seen in talking about the hybrid is this idea that you make those expectations crystal clear, so that they are clear to kids what you are expecting as a teacher. And so you should be able to, as a parent, quickly assess what it is that is needed, and how much of an out of that live, what would be the 40, 45, 50 minutes of that class, what's going to be expected. And I've also heard everything is less is more. And sometimes I take that very liberally, and I'm very, very less. But if you are looking at it and it seems like this is just way too much, remember that your kid's teacher did not go to school to become a virtual teacher, and they may not recognize that that's what they are expecting. I would say that after a couple of weeks, when all that work is coming in, they're going to realize they've assigned too much stuff. But definitely, speak up, or ask your student to speak up in a respectful way. And, hopefully that teacher is going to be like, oh yeah, okay, I need to ease up a little bit on that.
Thank you, Gretchen. And I think that, flexibility is the key, and your teachers are going to be flexible. I know something that's been helpful for us with my son's school is, a 20-minute mark. If he's really struggling with something, we would ask, and we'd say, if he's worked really hard for 20 minutes, can we put a line and say 20 minutes? And that was one of his modifications. And that helped him be so much more successful because he could focus on that. Joanna, did you have something to add to that?
No, it's just that I think the biggest mistake that teachers make in this going to a virtual environment, it's not their fault, but they try and take whatever they would do in the classroom and they just transfer that into a virtual environment. And if they got good training from their school, that's the number one thing they say. You have got to limit what you would normally do, what you would normally assign. And if it just like Gretchen said, if the teacher's struggling, they just may not know, they may not have gotten the best training. And you could be helping by telling that teacher that they're doing too much. Then maybe they're going to tell their other colleagues, and maybe you're going to benefit, not just your own kid, but you're going to benefit the school. And like Gretchen said, at some point that teacher's going to figure out, whoa, I did a bit too much there. But they're going to be willing for you to say, and I had that happen in the spring. I had to send a couple emails to teachers and say, whoa, this is the amount. It's good if you tell a teacher, like I said, my son spent 3 hours doing that. I just wanted to let you know. And the teacher was like, oh my God, that was not my intent. So just to keep those lines of communication open. They want to hear from you. The teachers want to hear from you.
Okay, great. Well, I think one thing is we all need to take just a collective deep breath. And, I want to say you can do this. If anybody can do this, we can do this as Duchenne parents, because we do hard things all the time. So we can do this. I even read an article that said, special needs parents are probably more prepared for the pandemic than anyone else, because we know how to be resilient. We know how to be flexible. We know how to modify. And I think that's true. So, and we know how to stay in during flu season. So we've got it all covered. But what I want to do is a little bit different than we've done most Family Fridays, but I want to just ask each of our panelists to give you guys just a 30-second pep talk about what they think is important during this time and just how to kind of keep a balance. So I'm going to start with Jill.
Oh, thank you for that question. I love that question because listen, it isn't, I know we spend a good amount of time on our voice with Duchenne, but if the rest of the family is neglected, nothing works. Nothing works. And it took me so many years to figure that out. You have got to care for yourselves. You've got to be kind to yourselves right now. You've got to be forgiving and not be hard on yourselves, which is the worst for me. And it took me forever to learn that. So I just say, just try to enjoy the joy right now of the things, the gifts that you can find in this.
Great. Okay, Gretchen?
I would say I'm reading this book about culturally responsive teaching in the brain. And it talks about, because I tend to be a very spastic person, I got a lot of energy. And so that idea of a 10-second break before you react or respond to anything. And so when we talk about calm and trying to do that calm and stay calm and model, taking in the things and just processing them, I'm going to work on 10 seconds. And so, when the technology isn't working, when something gets deleted that I was planning on going live with in a couple seconds, like just to try to be calm and relax and count to 10 before you respond.
All right, Joanna?
I would say just one day at a time. Get ready for the start of school and get ready for that. And then take, each day as it comes. Don't look too far ahead. Because it's too overwhelming. And again, all of this stuff is changing all the time. So you can plan for tomorrow, and then kind of take it from there. And I'm going to say again, what Gretchen said, remember to do that too. If you're having a difficult time with a teacher or something going on in school, do the same thing. Call a friend and yell about how mad you are and whatever. Take a breath. I always say for that, if you're really upset, wait 24 hours before you're going to shoot off an email to a teacher. Because again, I know, not all teachers are great. I'd like to think I'm one of the great ones, but for the most part, we're trying our best too. And maybe we just, maybe we messed up, but to wait 24 hours before you shoot that email off too, but one day at a time.
That's great. Thank you. I feel better already. One of our mottos in our family is enough is good enough. And I think that is really helpful in this situation. None of this is going to be perfect. We're all going to learn new lessons, and we just have to bring our flexibility and the resilience that we already have to this situation, and we will get through it. So thank you so much about virtual school. And again, as we always say, if you have any questions, if you have any concerns that weren't addressed here, please reach out. I know Jill said she can make herself available, especially for IEP questions and things like that. And I know Gretchen and Joanna are available as well. And of course, MD staff and all the resources on the website. So we're here to support you in this new learning environment, and just thankful that we have PPMD to help us walk through this in this way. So good luck on your virtual school, and we will see you next week for Family Friday. Bye-bye.